Hello, my name is LaRae Cantley. I am a social justice activist. So about several years ago, I seen how issues in the community pulled at my heartstrings. And I asked the question, what is happening about these issues? Who is doing something about these issues? And what that led me to do is to get involved. So when I seen the issue, I wanted a solution. I started to seek out who are the partners, who's at the table. In this partnering, I was able to get connected to grassroots organizations who has a mission and a vision that's similar to social justice actions. My beginning of the journey, it was around education. It was wanting to understand why the high rates of suspension were disproportionately impacting the children of color who were living in high poverty areas. And the solution to that was bringing restorative justice to the schools and restoring these children to the school community, opposed to suspending them or expelling them and sending them out into the community without this network of how do they survive, how do they learn, how do they get from this place where they're constantly dealing with challenges and feeling left out to being included and knowing that their education is important. So a day in the social justice world is looking at access. Who has access and who has a lack of access? And understanding that the equity in that is where you bring in the justice. So when I partner, I understand that there are nonprofits, there are philanthropists, there are even these broader organizations who have more of a say over the resources in industrial uses, the political uses, the legal uses in these areas. We need to make this connection. We need to make this connection with the voices of those that are being impacted by these systems. And so in the social justice world, having this background of lived experience and this connection to the world of storytelling, what I do is I sit with the members of the community and I hear directly from them what their experiences are. I make those connections from the time that they first began telling their story, which could be about when they were born and how they were able to access healthcare or how they weren't able to access healthcare, all the way up into the elderly and the challenges that they face with securing housing after having worked the majority of their lives very, very hard, but was not able to secure what they call wealth. And so understanding my partners, understanding what they could do, understanding my community, understanding what their challenges are, bringing those two worlds together and using that as a tool to bring the systems change, to co-design the services that are accessible and the programs that are accessible, and helping these organizations, helping these decision makers to see the value and bringing in the people that are marginalized, the people that are marginalized and most impacted by these systems and services. So it's about access, equity, the rights, and the participation. The most challenging part is coming from the world of lived experience. So what that looks like is I've already had challenges with like securing my own housing, securing what I would say an effective role to education where it felt supported, and then having to stand in the face of those who are able to make decisions around this. And when they don't quite understand, it feels Like you stood in this naked truth and you told them why it's important to be able to shift their views and their perspectives and see how they are instrumental in bringing this equitable process for people who don't have a voice. And sometimes they just look at you with this look of, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. And that's not enough. We want solutions. So that is one of the worst parts, is when people just look and just say, I'm sorry that happened. Or when people call you in and they want to hear this story and they listen and there's no solution afterwards. There's no action taken afterwards. It's just them listening to your story. The other thing that I find a great challenge is when the people who have been impacted with these long-standing disparities have this disbelief that they have a right. And so they don't see the credibility in their story in the action of them going out and voting and how this will empower systemic change. So it feels hopeless. It feels like they're defeated. And so I'm seeing them in this space and I'm reimagining. And this is the best part about it. The best part is when I get into this reimagination and I'm able to ask them questions that prompts their mind to begin to think, what could a quality life look like? And then I get to see people's lives transform. I get to see people who said, I remember when you showed up at the door and you were asking us to sign this petition. And I was like, oh, there's nothing that will change. And then later on, I get to see them when they have built this self-value and they've built this understanding around this decision-making system. And they get to see the changes. They get to see, oh, that school now has restorative justice because I remember when you came and you talked to us about it. And now I get to hold the school accountable for what restorative justice will do for my child, the rest of the students, and the entire community as a whole. So I love to see people's lives transform. Beginning, and I think this is probably the most important takeaway for young females, because we live in a world where there's this structure, there's this conditioning, there's this socialization where we've been taught a certain way to be, and we've even taken on these ideas of who we are based on where we live, the families we were born into, the type of activities that were going on around us, what our parents have or don't have, what our education journey looks like, what our bodies look like, how we sound, and understanding that my journey did not set me up to be in this position. So I came from poverty. I came from a place where in South LA, there was lots of drugs released into the community. In the 80s, there was such high numbers of addiction and folks going to jail due to the war on drugs. My family was hugely impacted by that. My dad, he saw fit to join the gang, and that was his idea of keeping his family safe, and to sell drugs. And that was his idea of providing for the family. See, at that time, lots of factories had been closed down that moved Black folks into this colonized area where they wanted to keep us in a certain space so that they could use the constant surveillance of the police and just this systematic way of shaping one to where people accepted this conditioning and thinking these are the only things that I'm available to do. learning about how my dad got into that journey, seeing how his life was impacted, and feeling as a child, knowing very early on that these things didn't feel good for me. Being a girl, I did not normally feel courageous enough to say, I don't like this, this is not okay. But I ended up getting to this domestic violence relationship where I was constantly suppressed in my voice, and I had children. There was so many things that was weighing heavy upon me to where my mental state was compromised. And during this compromised way of living, constantly like not knowing who I am, what my value is, why am I even here? This world is too hard to live in. I met a state of despair. While in this state of despair, wanting for my life to end, there was a new revelation that the reason that I had been living over 20 years of my life battling suicidal thoughts was because I was not living up to who I truly am. Knowing that I could have continued on that way, or I could have ended life, there was something inside of me that said, it's time to start saying, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. This is what's important to me, and I'm going to take action in this. There were hurdles, like already having a huge gap in my economic journey, already having a huge gap in my stability. So being homeless with my children, after signing up for housing in 1998, but not getting housed until 2012. The other thing is having this burden of the domestic violence. It was like something that constantly put this shame and this guilt and this heaviness upon me. So having all these challenges and all these hurdles, they still show up as this critical self-talk in the head. And what I find most valuable is constantly putting myself in places where I'm educating myself. And what's important right now is understanding how the political system works, because I've learned that policy changes things. It takes time, but it changes things. It changes things for girls, it changes things for women, it changes things for people of color, it changes things for people who have been marginalized with disabilities, with being veterans. It changes things. And the other thing is always being able to invest in what matters. And so my journey as a social justice activist came about because I cared about my children so much so that I was not willing to just take on the typical 9-to-5 and not be able to be available for my children's healing journey. So I put that in the forefront. Our healing journey is always there to keep us grounded so that I can show up to this work of social justice activism. And so I would say to you all, be intentional about the building of who you are, the knowing of who you are, the having that self-value that you are able to sleep with that night. And so you can wake up the next day and tackle the challenges knowing that this reimagining and this policy shift will bring about transformation.